to FANSPLAINED, a media criticism podcast with Ryan and Em. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Em.
And in this episode, we're continuing our MCU hiatus with the Marvel film Multiverse. This time, we're digging into X-Men Days of Future Past. So this is the 7th technical X-Men film release, 5th as a team title, sort of 2nd as a reboot. It does even more to mess with the timeline of the MCU, or the XMCU, I should say, the X-Men Cinematic Universe.
The XMCU.
And we'll get into the timelines one with this one, because this is really where they start getting all timey-wimey, obviously.
Yeah.
And where we think the separate timelines actually are. But before we get into that, because this is a Bryan Singer movie, spoilers, this needs a disclaimer that this episode is likely to include criticism of the film, the director, and may have mentions of toxic and harassing behavior. Thus, if criticism of this film, or specifically the director, are sensitive topics for you, we suggest you skip this episode. Mm-hmm. As usual, this will be intact for the next one as well, because that one's still a Bryan Singer movie.
Yeah.
We're still going to talk about them as films, because they are not just Bryan Singer, but if, you know, the whole topic of Bryan Singer really bothers you, it is okay if you give this one a pass, obviously. Yeah. We want everybody to feel comfortable and not triggered by stuff.
Thankfully, these films are a product of everyone involved, not just Bryan Singer, but because Bryan Singer is involved.
It makes it kind of uncomfy, and it is difficult to get around not mentioning some of his bullshit. Kind of like Joss Whedon, we can't really get around mentioning his bullshit when it comes up.
Because, like, I understand some people may be tired of hearing about it. I get that. But, again, these are men in positions of, yes, power, who actually, you know, have the power to dictate what these actors can do. And, you know, if they refuse, they can also, like Joss has said, would make their
lives a living hell. I mean, we saw that with Harvey Weinstein, too. That's part of what the problem with Harvey Weinstein was.
And that's really why we have to bring this up, because, you know, these are men who for too long were not held accountable by their actions or by their shitty behavior.
And we don't want to venerate these things we like without addressing that there are problematic elements behind them, and we can recognize that while still recognizing the film as a product of everyone involved, rather than just that person, but we can't really wholly separate one from the other without addressing it.
Because if, you know, these were your bosses, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be chill with everything they were doing to your
absolutely
people.
Not.
Like, that's the only reason we have to bring it up.
And, I mean, and fair game, I mean, we're going to do it with anybody that we feel we need to give this disclaimer to. That's, you know, like, we're not just going to do it to Joss because, you know, we don't like Joss, or we're not just going to do it to Bryan because we don't like Bryan, or whatever, you know, like, it's worth mentioning whenever this is an actual issue. I mean, hopefully it doesn't continue to be a massive issue with stuff we cover, but it happens. It
unfortunately happens, and I think it's better to address it than to keep sweeping it under the rug and let other people think that they can keep doing the same thing.
Exactly. So, that aside, X-Men, I almost called it X-Men First Class, wrong movie. Days of Future Past was released in May 2014, continuing the early to late May releases for these newer X-Men movies. They all generally tended to come out around the same time. I don't remember if Dark Phoenix did. That one was stuck with a lot of delays, though, so that one's just kind of
like how Lord of the Rings kept being released in December.
Yeah, or like Star Wars tends to prefer May or Christmas releases, but it's usually one or the other. So it was also produced by 20th Century Fox, as we've covered earlier. It's still a Fox product. This is why, for a long time, we didn't actually see any movie merchandise for these movies, because Fox didn't really want to give the money back to Disney.
Yeah.
So they didn't really market them in the way of merchandising beyond, like, art books or, you know, like, super expensive figures. But,
so we
like,
missed
you don't
out.
get, like, toys and whatever with these.
We missed out on all the good merch we could have had.
I missed out on all the good merch with James McAvoy's hair. Rude. But that aside. So this movie basically sort of continues with X-Men First Class. You have a lot of the same actors returning. But it's also retconning parts of First Class that were meant to be a full reboot, because this is the movie that makes a complete left turn when First Class was meant to be a full reboot of the series.
Yes.
And it makes a left turn and links it back to the previous series directly, so that it can retcon basically everything but X-Men 1, maybe X-Men 2, but that gets kind of dicey. We'll get into that when we get into the story, because we actually had a question about that when we get to the end of the movie. But we'll get into that. This was developed as X-Men 4 rather than First Class 2.
Makes sense.
And that was them being like, but then it'll lead into X5, which it kind of does, but again, kind of doesn't, and that kind of leads into the weird timeline-ness of it all. This was excused by Singer with, quote, multiverses, which is used to explain how the XMCU, the X-Men Cinematic Universe, generally works, which is fine. And this is probably right about the time we should get into this before we actually get into the writing of the movie specifically. So, with the timelines, and it's really messy, and I'm sure that people are going to disagree with us. We will probably disagree with each other a little bit on this too.
Exceedingly messy.
It's messy. So, the original trilogy is its own timeline.
Yes.
We'll call that timeline 1, right? You have X1, X2, X3.
Yeah.
Then you have X-Men Origins Wolverine, which retcons a little bit, but is largely intended to be a prequel to X1.
Yes.
It's messy, and we've talked about how messy that movie is, but it is still intended to be in Timeline 1.
Yes.
Then you have X3 leading directly into the Wolverine. That one is a direct sequel.
Yes.
Mentions everything.
Yeah.
That is Timeline 1.
And then the Wolverine leads into Days of Future Past.
And then the Wolverine leads into Days of Future Past.
So that is all.
The past part, or not the past part, the present part of Days of Future Past.
The present future part. So right up until we get to the very beginning of Days of Future Past, the Timeline 1 is what leads into the dark timeline.
Yes, and Days of Future Past, as best as I understand it, includes 3 different timelines in it. It includes Timeline 1, as we've talked about, with its present connection, because they had to connect it. I will give it props for retconning X3 out of existence.
Yes.
That's fine. So, Timeline 2 would be the one that I feel is mainly the prequel timeline.
X-Men
That is First Class.
Yeah.
The past part of Days of Future Past. Not the revisionist future of Days of Future Past. Does not include that. Because this one would include where they go with Apocalypse and where they go with Dark Phoenix, which directly, you haven't gotten to Dark Phoenix yet, but it directly contradicts what they do in Timeline 1. So, like, the way that people tried to explain it is that the end of Days of Future Past, where they have, like, the new happy whatever we fixed it timeline, was supposed to be the thing that these prequel movies led into.
Yes. But
they don't, because they directly contradict the Timeline 1.
Yeah.
Even if you take Dark Phoenix out of the equation, it still directly contradicts whatever happens in Timeline 1. So, Timeline 2, for me, is largely what they did with the newer movies. May or may not include The Gifted, but The Gifted also kind of connects to Timeline 1, because it has Blink in it. But I don't know. It gets so messy, because, like, The Gifted could also be the Logan timeline, because the X-Men are not around anymore. Right? But it's not, because Xavier didn't basically kill everybody.
Okay, I can't write it down, and we don't do images, so I'm just gonna I'm gonna use pens.
Okay.
Okay.
So Timeline 1 is the original trilogy.
No, see, here's how I'm looking at it.
Okay.
Timeline 1 is the original trilogy, including Wolverine Origins, including the Wolverine, and that leads into the dark timeline that's prior to Days of Future Past. That's Timeline 1.
Yes.
Timeline 2 is X-Men First Class, the past part of Days of Future Past, and then Apocalypse, and leading into Dark Phoenix. That's Timeline 2. That's just there.
Okay.
Timeline 3 is Logan, which is its own separate thing.
Yes, it is.
Timeline 4 is the new revisionist Happy that we see at the end of the X-Men. That is separate from Timeline 2.
Yes.
Because, like you said, it
directly contradicts the original trilogy. So Timeline 4 is connected to Timeline 1. It's basically an offshoot of Timeline 1.
It's an offshoot of Timeline 1. It's a branch off of that.
Yeah.
That makes its own timeline.
Yeah, it's a variant of Timeline 1.
And then I would say, from what I know of the New Mutants, that is probably its own freaking
That
timeline.
one is very weird and only lightly connects to stuff, so
that's we're going to tentatively call it Timeline 5. We're going to call Legion Timeline 6.
Yeah, because Xavier's completely different in that one, too, so it doesn't connect to anything.
And I'm going to say that Deadpool is technically in Timeline 6 because you have the little kid that plays David Haller in the Deadpool movie.
Deadpool 2 also directly connects to Timeline 2. So Deadpool's in everything. Deadpool crosses over everything. That's why Deadpool exists.
So Deadpool is just an omni timeline.
Yeah, Deadpool is like the Loki of the X-Men series where it crosses through everything.
Legion is still its own timeline because it has a completely different backstory for Charles.
It does.
And And
they never imply who David's mom is because Gabrielle Haller is his adopted mom.
No, they do show her later. Do they? It's the season that we have not watched yet. Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess we'll figure that out when we get there then. But yeah, that can be its own thing. And I'm still deciding about The Gifted, honestly.
And then I'm going to say that The Gifted is its own timeline as well. That's an offshoot of, Timeline 1?
Timeline 1 or Timeline 2 even, maybe, but probably Timeline 1 because the X-Men aren't around anymore.
Ugh, it's making my head hurt. Okay, so Timeline 1, original trilogy. Timeline 2, the prequel trilogy. Mm-hmm. Timeline 3 is Logan. Mm-hmm. Timeline 4 is the revisionist Happy thing that's an offshoot of 1. 1B, and then we have 1C, which is The Gifted. Then we have New Mutants. Then we have Legion.
Yeah.
We have
like 6 different timelines. 7?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7 different timelines, 2 of which are offshoots of another timeline.
Yeah, but this movie, I'm just gonna go on record. It includes 3 different, 3 different timelines.
4 different timelines. Because that's the dark timeline, the past timeline, the revisionist timeline. No, okay, that's 3. Mm-hmm. All right, you were. I was incorrect. I am numbered out right now.
Yeah, there also. I'm just going to get into it before we get into writing too. At the end of Days of Future Past, I don't know why they included this, but they have the part where Stryker fishes Logan out of the water at the end. They heavily imply that this is Mystique, not Stryker.
Because they do the eye flash thing.
So the implication here is that Logan would not have his adamantium in that timeline because he isn't actually meeting Stryker, he's meeting Mystique.
Except he does because
they mention it in Apocalypse, which is why I don't think the revisionist timeline.
They straight up show it in Apocalypse.
It's so weird. So I don't even know why they included that because it just overly complicates everything.
It does. It literally blows my pen timeline out of the water. And I don't appreciate it.
Yeah, I just don't really subscribe to that because it was literally just they're like trying to do this end of movie gotcha thing.
Like they did in the first movie.
Like it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Because if you go along with that logic, that means that Mystique was totally okay with having Logan be experimented on and put through this horribly traumatic and painful surgery that then gives him metal in his fucking body that slowly poisons him over decades.
Yeah, when we could just assume that this is Stryker, just straight up it's just Stryker, especially when Stryker shows back up in Apocalypse.
Yeah.
So we just kind of elect to ignore that because it's straight up a thing that they just threw in at the end to be like, haha, gotcha.
Yeah.
Because it breaks everything if you actually like take it seriously. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Even if you try and rationalize it out, it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, the pins helped.
Well, that's good.
Because I got this. See?
Like Magneto's little horns on his helmet.
No.
Yeah.
No. That's an ugly helmet.
Thank God they redid that costume.
That's an ugly helmet. We're not talking about it again. I did like his ascot, though.
Yes.
The Ascot edition was
The costuming
nice.
in this movie is much better.
It's much better.
Well,
but yeah,
in
that is,
that regard anyway.
That is sick. 5 different timelines with 2 offshoots of the original timeline.
Yes.
You're welcome. I fixed it for you. I explained it. I explained it, and I didn't need a big fancy X-Men timeline explained. Yeah. That's your explanation, guys.
Ta-da. So, in terms of directing and writing, this was directed again by Bryan Singer. We've addressed this. He was called out
Your phone's going off.
I know it is. I'm ignoring it.
Well, do something so it's not doing that. Please.
He's just being a baby. Don't interrupt me. He was called out specifically around the release of this movie. One of several allegations surfaced right about the time that this movie was released. He was called out by the author of American Psycho, who said that he dated someone who used to go to Bryan Singer's allegedly underage parties.
Which is not a laughing matter. I was laughing at the fact that when the author of American Psycho is calling you out.
Yeah. The allegation here is that Singer is a little bit like other abusers that I don't really want to name in this episode.
Allegedly.
Yes, allegedly. He's also, like, I don't just throw this out because, it's scandalous. Like, he's been in and out of court for years on years for various allegations. This one was just very specifically surrounding this movie. Unfortunately, Vaughn was supposed to direct this one and didn't. He still gets a story credit for it because he concepted it, which is why it feels a little bit different than just a straight up Singer X-Men movie.
Thank God.
But he actually left to do The Kingsman and then produce Fantastic Four.
Mm-hmm.
Why you'd leave for
you mean
Fantastic
you
Four.
mean Fan Four Stick.
Fan Four Stick, yes.
Jesus.
Not the old Fantastic Four, the new one.
Oh,
he
God.
produced that. Yeah.
Fan Four Stick is terrible.
So the writer on the film is Simon Kinberg, who, we've talked about in previous episodes. Again, I think that's why some of this feels as solid as it does, is because it's not just Singer doing everything.
Yeah.
The story is credited to Kinberg, Vaughn, and Goldman.
Mm-hmm.
Note that Singer is not credited with the story, just directing.
And that's probably why it is better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, it includes the same people who helped on First Class.
Yes. So we've covered Kinberg a little bit because he helped with X3 as much as you can, I guess. But he also did writing for Sherlock Holmes, Elysium, Jumper, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Fan Four Stick,
Boo!
and Star Wars Rebels. So some winners, some losers. Yeah. I tend to like Kinberg's X-Men movies. Okay, though. I know some people don't like the latter ones. I do, but we'll get to that when we get to those.
Yeah, it's kind of up and down. Like a lot of writers who we've been covering.
And some of this movie is even up and down.
Not all
Parts
of them.
Parts of it do not make a lot of sense. Parts of it I love.
Yeah, not everyone's going to write a winner, but I do think a lot of this movie works, even though, it does have some questionable choices.
Yes. So this movie, we've talked previously about how Charles and Eric is a metaphor for MLK and Malcolm X does not work and is a poor metaphor. But I appreciate this film for specifically actually making that metaphor more Charles as a metaphor for Kennedy and the country reacting to Kennedy.
Yes.
Because that's about the time that his health and mental state starts deteriorating.
Yes.
He blames Magneto for Kennedy's death. There were whole, fake viral videos made to promote the movie about Magneto supposedly, assassinating Kennedy or whatever. They made, fake Zapruder films, kind of. It was a little weird. So this is kind of how I feel like...
Zapruder films?
Yeah, but I feel like if they'd actually done the Magneto movie in that, like we talked about in the last episode, it would have gone full tacky, kind of like some of these viral videos kind of pushed it a little bit.
Full revisionist history and not in a good way.
Yeah, even though, they kind of subvert that with Magneto saying that he was trying to save Kennedy, not killing Kennedy.
Because guess what? He was a mutant, like us.
But he sure didn't care about killing Nixon.
He wasn't a mutant.
I have issues with this movie acting like the bad ending is subverted by saving Nixon.
Of all the presidents you could have saved.
Okay, sure. Great. That is
choice.
some weird commentary you decided to make here.
That is a choice. Unless you're telling me that this basically serves as a come to Jesus moment for Nixon, and he, like, you know, stops being tricky dick over there.
I mean, they did that with Senator Kelly in the original, like, comic stuff, didn't they? Where, like, he actually came back around. And then he was elected president, and that's how they tried to get around it. Because there was that animated episode where, like, they thought Gambit was trying to kill Senator Kelly. Yeah. And Bishop came and kept trying to, like, wreck his shit up all the time.
And not Gambit.
And then it wasn't even Gambit, it was Mystique the whole time. Surprise, it's basically this movie.
Yeah.
So I feel like they may be implying that it's kind of a Senator Kelly thing without using Senator Kelly. I don't know, but it is a strange choice.
It is
to pick Nixon of all people.
Yeah.
It's weird. So there were other weird writing decisions, including Kitty's secondary power that we literally never mentioned until right now, and still never really explain, where she can send people's consciousnesses back into the past somehow for some reason.
I don't know, man.
Because she can phase through things. She can phase through time or something, I guess.
I guess that's the explanation. I love...
The Rogue cut makes even less sense, so we're not really covering that, because it's really just there to, like, add a weird subplot that is very unnecessary.
See, I love Kitty Pryde. She was always one of my favorite characters from the comics. And, you know, I didn't have a problem with Elliot Page's portrayal, even though I did not like X3. I actually really liked their Kitty.
Mm-hmm.
And I like their Kitty here. It's just, as a fan of Kitty Pryde, I have no fucking clue where this power came from, or if there's ever been a mention of it anywhere else that I haven't seen that.
I think it's straight up because they wanted to include Kitty in a comic storyline that is meant to feature Kitty, even though they did it in, like, reverse.
Yeah.
I mean, I get why they chose that, because Logan is the one with connections to everybody in the X-Men Cinematic Universe. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to send Kitty back, because she doesn't know these people as well.
No.
I get it. But, story-wise, it is a weird decision when you could have just had a new mutant with that power doing the same thing for Logan. I don't have a problem with Kitty being in here. It's just, it's a weird... out of left field decision for that secondary power.
It's just really kind of bizarre that all of a sudden Kitty has this power, and it's like, oh, well, okay, I guess I just have to accept this because this is what we're doing.
Sure, I guess. I question the decision of even connecting this back to the old movies when you could have just rebooted the whole thing and ignored it. It would have been a lot easier than trying to make a convoluted movie to retcon only pieces of a thing and then spawn off 3 different timelines. Like, it's just... Okay, sure.
My head still hurts from trying to explain all of them, too.
I like X-Men, and I like the time travel-ness of X-Men. I love it. But it raises a lot of questions, and it makes stuff really complicated.
Yeah, like, the time travel aspect is one of the reasons I really love this movie. It's just... Yeah, trying to keep track of the timelines and the continuity is genuinely a pain in the ass.
Oh yeah, it's awful. It's awful. Yeah, and then I've already added that they made like a separate sort of director's cut of the movie called the Rogue Cut.
Yeah.
Where they have this additional subplot where they go to
where Rogue
basically rescue Rogue so that she can come in and fill in for Kitty, who gets wounded by Wolverine when he like has a trigger moment with Stryker.
Yeah.
And he like stabs her. And
scratches her.
Yeah, like he kind of nicks her to the point where like she's bleeding out. Mm-hmm. So they go get Rogue so that Rogue can take Kitty's power and take over for Kitty basically. Okay, but
which
again,
really
it makes me question things in general, like how they make this whole movie about Mystique and Mystique's power and how she can transform into anybody, so she's the one that they wanted to make the Sentinels. When really, if you think about it, wouldn't they also want Rogue?
Yeah.
Because that's literally what she does. She's the one that takes powers, not just pretends to be other people.
Yeah.
There's a plot hole with this surrounding Mystique, because Mystique can't take other people's powers when she's posing as them.
Yeah.
She can look like them, she can imitate them, she cannot use their powers. We even established this in X1. It was part of how they found out she wasn't actually Wolverine.
Yep. Is
because she didn't have, like, she couldn't, like, the claws weren't actual adamantium.
Yeah, and he cut right through them.
And she doesn't have, like, the healing factor.
Yeah.
So, really, if you think about it, the plot hole doesn't make a lot of sense, because they should want Rogue.
Yeah, they should.
Not Mystique, or at least want Rogue on top of Mystique. Either way, but I feel like Rogue's power is a little more the thing you'd want to make these Sentinels.
Yeah.
Especially when they're absorbing powers, because Mystique cannot do that.
Unless that's why they kept Rogue around and were experimenting.
I mean, I think it's heavily implied they are, but in this cut of the movie where she's not there, that's not indicated.
Well, I think
it's a mess. It's just...
Actually, her not being in this cut of the movie pretty much implies that they did the same thing to her that they did to Mystique, and that they killed or experimented on her.
I would have appreciated at least a mention of it. Just gonna put that out there.
That seems to be the implication.
They've always done Rogue's character kind of dirty, to be fair.
Like, she's such a central character in the comics that it's kind of like, why the fuck why even introduce her then if this is how you're gonna be?
I know. It raises a lot of questions. Anyway, so summary of this very convoluted movie. I will try and get through this as...
But yeah, bring in the Rogue
concisely
cut.
as I can.
Yeah, I think the Rogue cut just exists to show that Rogue is there, but...
We actually hired Anna Paquin for this, we promise.
But in context, it really just makes the story way more convoluted.
It kind of bogs the pacing down a little bit. It's not the best. So Sentinels have hunted mutants to near extinction in a dystopian future in a last-ditch effort to save the few survivors left and hopefully alter the present course. Kitty Pryde uses a secondary power to send Logan's consciousness back into 1973 to convince a younger Charles and Eric to avoid disaster, aka Raven's assassination of inventor Bolivar Trask and the subsequent use of her genetics for Trask's Sentinel program. Logan discovers a Charles and Eric grown farther apart than ever. Charles overmedicates his spinal injury to the extent that the drug has temporarily removed his telepathy instead, due to his school becoming defunct and ex-students being used and dying in the Vietnam War. Eric, on the other hand, is being himself, locked up in prison for the supposed assassination of Kennedy.
Being himself.
And in this course, he's lost support from Raven, who is now a rogue agent and in danger of becoming captured and used by Trask in the program due to her shape-shifting and long life abilities. That's because this whole new... These movies kind of, the way that they set them up being like 10 years apart from each other, I have to assume that it's just a trait of mutants in general, that they age a lot slower.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I cannot accept that Dark Phoenix James McAvoy turns into Patrick Stewart in 10 years. Less than 10 years.
Right.
Weird. It's weird. So I just kind of assume that these new mutants already have, like, they all kind of have that kind of trait where they just have long life, and that's the way that I rationalize the fact that they don't look like they've aged 10 years.
Yeah, because
every time they do a new movie.
Yeah, because in Apocalypse, Charles is allegedly in his 50s.
Yeah, he does not look it.
No.
By the time he's in Dark Phoenix, he's supposed to be in his 60s.
No.
No.
No. We're not. No.
Not correct.
That is incorrect.
That is incorrect.
So it's easier just to assume that all mutants have this, like, slow aging process, and that's just a
part of the mutant X gene. Yeah. So Logan finds Charles and cajoles him into helping him find Eric so they can stop Raven from her attempt to assassinate Trask. Sort of, I said the president because I forgot that it was mainly Eric that tried to kill the president, not Mystique.
No, we tried to save the president. Well, the good president.
The first president, not the second president.
Yeah.
In this, they need to break Eric out of prison and can only do so with the help of an, quote, old friend of Logan's, Peter Maximov, a mutant with the ability of super speed. Except that he's not Logan's old friend here. The guy's never met Logan in this timeline because Logan is too young for that sort of... Or Peter, whatever.
Peter's too young.
They haven't met yet.
He's still a kleptomaniac, though.
He is. So once Eric is free, however, it's only a matter of time before he tries to take Mystique's cause as his own, and thus the few X-Men left, Charles, Hank, and Logan, are left to try and convince Mystique off her course themselves. But can they avert disaster and the death of a very, very important public figure, or multiple public figures? And will it really make a difference for the dystopian future to which Logan must eventually return? There you go. That's a summary.
Wow.
It's convoluted, but not. But it is, but it's not. So, to that point, returning main primary actors include Fassbender, McAvoy, Jennifer Lawrence, Nicholas Hoult, Hugh Jackman, Halle Berry, Patrick Stewart, and Ian McKellen, and then it adds primary actors Peter Dinklage as Bolivar Trask. I love his Trask. I find his Trask very creepy, and I thought it really worked.
It did.
And Evan Peters as Peter Maximoff.
Who was a great addition, really.
The one time they did, like, the slow-mo thing is just, like,
mwah.
chef kiss. So secondary returning actors, I don't know why I included Paquin, sort of, if you include the Rogue cut. Otherwise, that's literally just a cameo.
Yes.
Elliot Page, Sean Ashmore, Daniel Cudmore, who plays Colossus. And then you have new secondary actors such as Omar Sy, who plays Bishop, Fan Bingbing, who plays Blink and is subsequently replaced when it comes to The Gifted.
Yeah.
Then you have Adon Canto as Sunspot and Boo Boo Stewart as Warpath.
Yes.
Cameos. Stan skipped out on this cameo for a convention.
Aww.
That's why he's not in it.
Stan!
Then you have Josh Hellman as Stryker. That one could be kind of a secondary role. Kind of depends. He's not really in it a ton. Then you have Famke Janssen, James Marsden, Lucas Till, and comics writers Len Wein, and Chris Claremont play U.S. senators.
Oh, really?
In the movie. Mm-hmm. So, there was also this pseudo-drama where Singer tried to play an April Fool's joke on people by claiming that they cast Lady Gaga as Dazzler.
That's so mean.
And then it was revealed to be an April Fool's Day joke, so we never got that.
That's so mean.
But I remember people talking about it for a hot minute. Yeah, so do you have any notes on the acting specifically beyond that?
Well, I really liked a lot of the acting, actually. I think even the secondary characters and the New Mutants that we are introduced to, like, especially in the Dark Timeline, they're pretty good. For as little as we saw of them, I was very invested, and it was horrific to see their brutal deaths.
Multiple times.
Especially in the last one. Like, Colossus literally was ripped apart. I forgot
Bishop literally self-exploding, though.
And then they lift that other guy and literally blow his face off. Like, I forgot how violent that shit got.
Poor
that was awful.
Yeah, like, I did appreciate that for as little development as we got with a lot of those characters, because we don't get a whole lot with them, but they did actually manage to do the team dynamic that the later original trilogy movies had a problem with, where everyone gets some equal time, they get to show their powers, they get to use their powers creatively.
Yeah, that's one of the few things I think this movie is really... It did the same thing that First Class did, in that it really focused on the team dynamic. It focused on showing the powers. It was very creative, especially with how Blink did her portals. Doing portals right, mind you, in a Marvel movie.
Like, as much as I enjoy X2, and it's a phenomenal movie, aside from you-know-who, this is probably my favorite of the Singer X-Men movies.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't feel quite as much like a Singer X-Men movie.
I think this is probably...
It's higher quality, I think.
This is definitely one of my favorite X-Men movies, and I really don't want to say that it's my favorite X-Men movie solely because
of you-know-who.
Yeah, solely because of that. But, man, there are parts in this that I really, really love, and I really loved the dynamic between Fassbender, McAvoy, and Hugh Jackman.
Because even though,
it always kind of runs the risk of becoming like the Logan show. I feel like this is one of those X-Men films that's it's truly an X-Men outing. It's about everybody. It's not just about him.
Yeah, it actually does divert away from being just about Logan, which is not a thing X2 does. Mainly because most of the plot is centered on Logan, which is fine, and it works, and I like that plot, but it is mainly about Logan. This one is not. Logan is just kind of there.
But I will say that I do love a lot of Jackman's scenes in this. I love James McAvoy's Charles because, like we were saying, this is how you do grief. This is how you show grief in a realistic way.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this back up when we get to WandaVision because as much as I dislike the continued weird implication that Charles is into Raven for more reasons than for just being his sister.
I didn't like that.
Weird if I could give up on those implications while still having him grieve the fact that Eric really screwed her over mentally or whatever without making it this, you took her away from me, but then having to run that back within the same line of dialogue because you don't want to make it creepy. You're still making it a little bit creepy.
Yeah.
Especially when this movie tends to film Mystique the way that it used to film Rebecca Romaine.
Yeah, here's the thing. J-Law's acting is fine. Again, I still don't really like her character being made the central focus. But
it at least worked for this movie.
It worked for this plot, yes. But at the same time, the other thing that I really noticed is just how her fighting style was. It was literally a repeat.
It was literally a repeat.
It wasn't. No, it's not even just a repeat. It was just the way that she could have done a lot of those moves differently. It felt like it was overly sexualized with a lot of her fighting, especially because she's essentially naked.
Yeah, and I think that is attributed to the fact that this is, again, made by people who made the old school movies, and they were trying too hard in certain places to make some of those homages overt.
Yeah.
And one of them was in trying to change Raven from these new movies into the cold Mystique, who really doesn't have a lot of development in the older movies.
Like
she's there to be menacing and creepy,
and
not really all that sympathetic.
It's also a very stark contrast to how she was. I mean, granted, years have gone by. It's just, I don't know. It feels like
very different.
We go from her still learning how to, utilize her powers and everything to suddenly she is like the most elite assassin who rivals the Black Widow.
Yeah, it's really odd. It's really odd.
And, when it comes to the whole triangular thing, again, when they do that in the movie, it's gross. I don't like it. I still don't like it. It's only when they actually drop that off, like, near the end of the fucking movie, and it's more about Charles being like, look, you're my family. I don't want you to make this horrible mistake. Once they start doing it like that, everything's fine.
It's fine. The whole movie should have been toned like that.
Yeah.
But when they tend to give it this air of jilted lovers, it gets really weird, and it does not work. Because
the only time it works that way is when it's between Charles and Eric. I can buy it there.
Like, Charles did sort of lose Moira. He could be mad about that, but he was not in a relationship with Mystique.
He didn't even bring up Moira once.
No, they don't bring Moira back up until the next movie.
Yeah.
Again, it's because they're trying to center this weird triangle that isn't there and shouldn't have ever been there.
No.
It's strange, but yeah, when they sit on familial lines, it's great. It's fine.
Great.
It's all I ever wanted. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Like when it becomes Charles recognizing that he's been trying to control her rather than treating her as an equal.
Yeah.
Because, and he does that. He has done that since the first movie when he talks about raising her rather than growing up with her, and Eric even points that out at one point. These are valid points.
Yeah.
But when you try and make it about this, you took her from me!
That makes...
It makes it sound like he's a jilted lover, not her brother.
It does.
It's just weird.
It makes him sound like he was the spurned lover there, and I'm just like, no,
I still buy his acting, it's just not a writing point I love.
But I also... One of my favorite things out of all the X-Men movies is in this movie, and that's the scene between McAvoy and Stewart.
Oh god, I cry like a baby every time.
It's one of the most well-done scenes. It's just these two beasts of acting off each other and just being so good. I mean, hell, him looking into Logan's mind and being like, I don't want your future, you know,
and
it's
crying.
And then you get to him and Patrick Stewart, and it's just like, this guts me every time, and it's so good.
I'm really mad that such a hopeful, uplifting point came from someone I do not want to acknowledge in any way, shape, or form.
I know.
Again, which is why I have to credit literally everyone else who is associated with this rather than
you know, I'm gonna credit Stewart and McAvoy for that scene, because that scene would not have worked without them. And their portrayals of Charles, their understanding of Charles, and then them coming together and being like, okay, this is how we're gonna do this.
It's gutting, it's upsetting, it's
beautiful.
It's
really.
The reason I love Charles.
Yeah.
Well, movie Charles. I have to preface this every time because comics Charles is a completely different beast. But the XMCU Charles,
yes,
there's a reason I stan him. This is one of them.
I mean, I stan him pretty hard too now.
It's perfect.
It is.
I think I had another point to that, but I completely forgot what it was.
Also, I got to see Hugh Jackman's ass, and it was glorious.
In a better movie than the last time.
Yes. That does go in acting, because God bless that man for going like, you know what? Yeah, I'll go nude. He goes commando, why not?
God, I can't believe
Commando in jeans, Logan, for fuck's sake.
God, the chafing.
Okay.
I'm not even there, and I can't imagine it. Ugh, awful. So the cinematography, like we covered in the last episode, was done by Newton Thomas Siegel. Or not the last episode. We've covered him before with Bryan Singer, though, because he's done a lot of Bryan Singer movies. The Usual Suspects, Apt Pupil. That one, there's a lot of controversy surrounding that movie, too.
Apt Pupil? Yeah, that's based on a Stephen King short story, and that had Ian McKellen in it, too.
That is apparently where a lot of the original allegations came from, was that set.
Well, that makes sense, considering the lead was pretty much a minor when he made that movie.
That's part of the problem.
Shit. I mean, that's already a fucked up movie as it is. But then to have that attached to it.
And then Siegel also made X-Men, X-Men 2, Superman Returns, Valkyrie, Jack the Giant Slayer, Apocalypse, Bohemian Rhapsody, and Singer's pilot episode of The Gifted. So he's basically like in cahoots with, well, I mean, I don't know in cahoots, but he works very closely with Singer cinematography wise.
Yeah, he works for him frequently. That's not the same as being
not
in cahoots.
It's very different. That's not what I meant.
We're not going to say that.
No, because that's not what I mean. No. I mean artistically work together
it's
a lot.
It's like when Martin Scorsese worked with Robert De Niro a lot, and then he started working with Leonardo DiCaprio a lot. You know? Yeah. When a certain director finds cinematographers that they like, or they find certain people they like working with a lot, that's who they go to every time.
Yeah.
And that's what this guy sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, I'll get to that, back to that in a minute, but in terms of look, the only thing that I really wanted to know, other than the fact that I was extremely happy that this had color in it, which is one of my biggest problems with X2, is it doesn't really.
It really does not have a lot of color.
Is that I understand that they had to change the makeup for Mystique because Jennifer Lawrence was having like allergic reactions. I have zero problem with that. But damn, did they color test that? Because it looks really odd in this movie. It looks way too dark, way too obviously makeup-y.
It's definitely a choice.
I don't know, like, could they have, fixed that CGI after or something? I don't know, but it looks very odd.
Because, see, that blue by itself is fine, but then when you have it with that color red, it just kind of clashes.
It wasn't, I mean, it still looks very weird when you're, close-upping on her face. Because it's very hard for her to emote through it because the paint is so dark.
Yeah.
It's just, it's an odd color that they picked for that I don't know if it really quite worked, and it still looked way too oily and makeup-y for me. I don't know what the business behind all that was. It's just an odd choice when you could have smoothed it out with CGI after the fact or something.
But hey, I was right. A lot of bloobs in this. Titties out.
Oh my god.
The whole movie.
God.
Most of the movie.
I hate it.
And that's the other thing that you brought up too. If she had just worn more clothes, she probably
wouldn't have to do as much makeup in the first place.
Yeah.
If they just let Mystique wear clothes like she does in the comics, Like, you can still keep her blue-skinned like you did at the end of First Class.
Yeah.
But then you wouldn't have to do so much body paint.
You could have given her a really cute, well, not cute, but a really sexily cast.
Yeah, you could have done
instead of just making her straight up in the nude, spreading legs everywhere.
I hate it.
I'm like,
I
okay.
hate it with the old Mystique too. I do, because it is overly sexualized, and I still think it's a little male gazy.
Like, look,
because it's very weird.
Like, look, I'm not the biggest fan of J-Lo, but I will say, yes, she's very pretty. Yes, she has a great looking body, but again, there's a big difference between me admiring that or saying that versus me, you know, being okay with just the constant leg spreading and flipping and all this shit that
very
really
specifically done to have her legs spread a lot.
And, like, I don't even like it when Black Widow does that. And I stand, you know, Natasha in the movies all the time.
I know
but
you do.
Even that, there's a point where it gets a little too much. It almost borders on parody at a certain point. It's ridiculous.
But yeah, so like that was really my only beef with it. It still looks pretty much like a period piece. Doesn't really quite look like a Vaughn movie anymore, because it's not.
But I think it
is very strong as a period piece.
But I think it actually looks better than all the other Singer X-Men movies.
It does, 100%.
It does not look exactly like a Vaughn movie, but it tries really hard to get to that point, and I think because of that, that's why it looks so much better.
Mm-hmm.
It looks so much better. Like, there are scenes and the lighting is just.
And when you have, like, the old imitation of, like, the cameras and stuff, I really appreciate those effects, too.
Yes. And also the costuming and all that shit. Like, a lot of it worked very well.
It was still very strong. I still have questions about Peter's costume, because it feels a little 80s for me, not 70s, to be fair. It's a little too much, like, shiny pleather. It feels a little too much like hair metal for me.
No. They did have that in the 70s, because I've seen quite a few horror movies in the 70s that did have costumes.
I'm sure it exists. It just feels more 80s for me, the way that they put it all together. No, he looks like he's in the wrong movie for me.
No, they had people dressing like that. Not a lot of people. Most people, were in the kind of costumes we saw everyone else in, but there were definitely people who liked doing that kind of shit. Or they had that other material that was like, was it crushed velvet?
Oh, God.
Shit. Polyester and all that crap.
Yeah.
They had that, or they had this, what was it, silk or something? It looked like silk, it was shiny like it, but it didn't have it, or it wasn't silk proper.
I mean, yeah, they make certain silks that are a little more matte. They also have, like, satin.
Yeah, like, they had a bunch of...
Oh, I know. They loved polyesters back then. It just felt... The way that they designed it still feels a little more 80s for me than it does 70s, but that's neither here nor there. So, to that point... Well, not to that point. Moving on.
Again, we stan Eric's ascot, just saying.
Yeah. Not his fedora. I know you like his fedora.
I
cringe when they make him wear a fedora.
Look, it's the Fassi allure with the fedora, okay? Him and the sunglasses. It just
I'm
felt
glad they redid his costume so that he did not look like the end of First Class.
I know. It felt like a continuation of his beatnik style in the X-Men First Class.
Yeah. I was very into that.
Thank God they changed his suit, because, yes, I like the muted colors better. I think it works better for this version of Eric. And if they had wanted to go with the magenta, they could have. I just didn't like
need to do it a little bit. Yeah, the style of it was not great.
His costuming was just in general really nice in this.
I mean, and you know I love Charles's terrible shirts.
You like his terrible shirts, and you love
his sweaters. But his terrible shirts in this movie are just...
I did really like his schlubbiness. It was kind of great. Seeing him just kind of...
looking like an absolute mess.
Just waltzing around, kind of like... bleh, trying not to tip over.
I love him.
I think James McAvoy had a ball with that. I was actually... I really love his performance in this. I can't stress 100%. That enough. And yeah, I loved Eric being a dramatic fucking whore.
Yes,
everything.
Absolutely, yes.
I'm
mad at you. I'm gonna lift an entire stadium up so I can surround the White House with it. Sir.
And also, can we... didn't like Hank being an enabler.
No, Hank is... This is why, and you'll get to this when we get to Dark Phoenix, but this is why I tend to have an issue with Hank's portrayal, in Dark Phoenix, because he acts like he has any kind of authority to tell Charles anything about himself when Hank is literally the one handing him drugs. Hank is literally the one enabling him to go back on them.
Like, even
Hank is the one that's like, here, I'm going to give you extra because you missed a dose after I literally just told Logan that you take too much of it.
Yeah.
Hank is, like, the worst kind of enabler. I don't love this. Yeah. I mean, like, if you were going to keep that consistent, fine, but let's recognize that for what it is, and that is Hank enabling Charles's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is not putting them on equal footing in any way. Hank is literally enabling Charles's nonsense. Mm-hmm. Well, he's just sad all the time. I get it, but, like, 2 movies from now, you're gonna yell at him in ways that act like you've never done this for him before. Yeah. So, go off, I guess.
Yeah, there are definitely some...
There's some writing choices. I don't necessarily think it's the acting. It's the writing choices.
Yeah, there are some questionable writing choices, but overall, I like a lot of the writing. I like a lot of the characters.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And I definitely love Logan's sass at Eric, being like, so you gotta pick up all that shit?
I love it. I love it. So I love it. And you could tell that James was so excited to be the one that got to say the F-bomb.
Yes!
Oh my god. Love it.
Especially after some of the movies he's been in where he's just dropping F-bombs left, right, and center.
Oh my gosh, right?
He gets to give Charles a potty mouth for a hot minute.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful.
So, moving on, the composer is John Ottman, who we've covered with X-Men. He also served as the editor, and he does that pretty frequently. He works with Bryan Singer a lot as well, or at least used to. He'll do a lot of, like, composing and editing, both for a lot of those projects, so this isn't really a whole lot new. This was the first time an X-Men theme was retained and reused, though, and you can tell because it sounds like an old-school X-Men movie. I think it works for that because it is connecting it to that, but I still tend to prefer the stylized stuff more. That is just me.
I mean, look, I really love the music in X-Men First Class, but there's music in this one that just really hit me right in the feels.
I know.
They get me, and I think it may not be the strongest soundtrack overall, but it definitely has some of the most beautiful tracks in there, if I can say that.
It's pretty. I agree.
Like Xavier,
I just tend to prefer the stylized stuff better.
Like the music during that scene called Xavier's Hope. That shit.
Don't. I'm just gonna cry again.
That's the one.
Don't do it to me.
That's what I mean. That's the one.
Yeah, like it's fine. It's one of those where it's still nice. I still like it. I just
it's
prefer
also
one or the other.
also noticeable. It's not just background.
It's not just background noise like a lot of the movies we talk about where it's like, okay, this sounds the same as 15 other movies I've heard. Great. No, it's nice. It is very old school X-Men because that is the point. Yeah, well,
not that old school.
Not that old school.
Unfortunately.
Old school as in original trilogy of these movies, old school. Like, even with the, like, opening genetics sequence, like, we're right back to that. It was like, this feels like we're back in 2000 all over again with, like, this steel, like, font over the top of it, too. I'm like, wow, we really came right back to 2000, didn't we? Damn.
And they do the same thing in Apocalypse, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since I've watched it, but I'm pretty sure I remember that.
Well, we'll get to that soon enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, on that note, what would your overall rating for this movie be? As a movie, not people involved with it, just as a product.
As the product itself, I think I would give it a 5 out of 5.
Yeah?
Because, it still has some of that triangular shit that I hated from X-Men First Class, but it feels like they do drop it off a lot sooner, and they just, stick to it being, like, a family thing, which is what I think it should have always been. Mm-hmm. And also, the cast is really great. I really love the time-traveling aspect. Mm-hmm. I really loved the use of powers and actually the creative showing of them and just had all the range, all the gamut of them. I really liked Peter Dinklage's Trask.
Peter Dinklage,
I did. I thought
Dinklage.
he was actually really good as Trask. He was very... Just his delivery was very fitting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he always just kind of held a very...
I also really love him in those glasses.
He held a very, serious air about him, and it worked. I really, really love the fact that we got McAvoy and Stewart acting off of each other. I really loved that Logan was in it and got to be Logan, but he didn't overshadow anybody. I like that everyone got some screen time, that everyone got to have a moment or two. And I think that's pretty much why it's a 5 out of 5, because the things that I like about it felt so strong, especially, like, even that scene in the airport where he's, like, talking through different people to try to get Raven's attention. I loved that. I thought that was such a cool usage and was so great to show Xavier's power and part of just one of the many things that he can do. I feel like so many of those scenes are so strong in this. Combine it with, the music that I like, combine it with how good it looks, all the colors, all the cinematography and all that, and it feels to me like it just feels like a better experience to me. I'm not going to say it's a stronger movie than X-Men First Class, because I really love X-Men First Class, but I definitely think it's relatively on the same level of enjoyment as it. And I don't know, it's like I'm giving it the same rating as Logan because it still gut punches me, but it doesn't make me break down and sob the way Logan does. I mean, it's really
few
hard.
Things are going to really be difficult to get through it if it did that.
It's really hard for me to actually label that Logan as my favorite one because it's so depressing. It's so good, but it really fucks me up.
Yeah.
And at least with this one, you have the good ending, and you there is a sense of hope, there's a sense of possibility, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why it might be my favorite one. Even though there are still some questionable choices, it's not a perfect movie. It doesn't do everything First Class did so well, no, but it does... What it does well, it does very, very well. It does very strongly, and that's why I'm giving it that rating.
So I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. Obviously. We've talked about this. I would probably rate it at a 4, which is putting it below First Class, but we've already talked about how, First Class is, my primo experience.
Yeah.
But that is solely because I really, really wish that they had just... Some of the writing decisions are weird. Obviously, we've gone over that. But I really wish they just stuck with rebooting the canon. As much as I like the time travel storyline, it overcomplicates stuff. It would have been simpler to, retcon the movies you didn't like by just letting this be a full reboot.
Yeah.
It would have been a lot simpler.
Yeah.
I would have preferred that a little bit.
Agreed.
To that.
It would have been much better.
I really just did not need it to connect to the newer movies because I just really wanted us to be done with them.
Yeah, it would have made a lot more sense to just let it be a reboot, and we wouldn't have had so much confusing timeline.
Yeah, you wouldn't have all the confusing timeline stuff born out of this movie. It wouldn't have as many of the plot holes that are still present in it, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's still a good movie. I still appreciate it. That's why it's still a 4. I love the look of it. I love everything else about it. I really wish that it had been a different movie.
And has the Quicksilver scene in it.
The Quicksilver scene is great. I love the time period part of it.
Yeah.
The past part of this movie, it's kind of like me playing Assassin's Creed. I love the past part of it.
Yeah.
When you get back into the future stuff, I don't care. Could not care less. But, the past simulator part of it, perfect. Love it. 10 out of 10 every time. And that's kind of how I feel about this. Is I love the bulk of the movie.
Yeah.
But I really just don't care about it connecting. And the way that it connects back with the offshoot timeline that we act like is just the sacred timeline with the prequels when it's not, and we're not going to address that we broke everything. It opens too many doors it doesn't close.
Yeah.
I just wish that they'd straight up either made an X4 or made this a straight up First Class 2. But doing it both ways just is messy.
They wanted their cake and wanted to eat it too.
And it doesn't quite work.
No.
Like, it's cool, and it works the best it can, I think, for the concept.
I think it works as, like, a standalone movie, but when you try to
connect it to anything else, it just makes no sense. Like, I think it really works for the concept that it is given. I just really question how that concept fits into all of the others.
Yeah.
It's just messy. But not in a Deadpool way where that's intentional. Yeah. And I think that's where my fault with it is it's the mess that it creates and the holes that it leaves and the gaps in the timelines and the story and everything else. That's not intentional. It is just a product of what this movie is.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it is at a 4 for me, because it's still good. I still enjoy it. I still enjoy it way above the other Singer movies, for sure.
Yeah, considering how much they were trying to juggle in this, I'm amazed it's as good as it is.
Yeah, because they're juggling a lot, but I wish that they were just juggling a little bit less, because it's still a little too much, and it's very ambitious and doesn't quite get there.
Yeah.
So that would be why I put it at a 4.
That's fair.
Fair.
I mean, I can absolutely agree with all of those points. I think it's just for me, experience-wise, that's why I gave it a 5 out of 5.
Yeah, that's fair. It's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. So thank you for listening to this episode of FANSPLAINED. If you enjoy what we do, consider donating on Coffee. Everything we make goes right back into the production quality of the show. This one a little less awkward than the last time. We appreciate all of our subscribers and everything you do, and we're thankful for anything from Hulk smashing that like button to your question and comments on each episode, and especially sharing the show with your friends.
It's the 70s. Everyone's ass is out. Yeah!
Great! I love that you brought it back right at the end. Fantastic.
You're welcome.
FANSPLAINED is a weekly media criticism and deep dive podcast, and we're currently still working our way through the chronological order of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Next episode, we'll be continuing our multiversal hiatus with X-Men Apocalypse. You can find our updates here on YouTube as well as on Twitter and Coffee at FANSPLAINED. If you want more of our conversations on the MCU and other fandoms, you can subscribe to our channel and hit the bell for new episode notifications. So until next time, Salt Shakers, this has been Ryan
and Em
with the FANSPLAINED podcast, and we'll see you next episode.